For 15 years, James Hetfield and Jason Newsted hadn't spoken. Not since Jason left Metallica in 2001, bitter about how he'd been treated, resentful of the years he'd spent feeling like the band's outsider. They'd been brothers once, but that relationship had died. Then, in 2023, James's phone rang. It was Jason. "I need to tell you something," Jason said. "I just sold a painting for $50 million, and I'm donating all of it to your charity, in Metallica's name." James was silent, trying to process what he was hearing. The man who had every reason to hate Metallica was giving away a fortune in their honor. "Why?" James finally asked. Jason's answer was simple. "Because you made me who I am, and I was angry for too long." That phone call led to the first real conversation they'd had in over a decade, and eventually to a reunion nobody thought would ever happen. To understand the weight of that phone call, you need to know the history between Jason Newsted and Metallica. Jason joined Metallica in 1986, weeks after Cliff Burton's tragic death. He was 23, replacing a legend in a band on the verge of global success. The pressure was immense. For 15 years, Jason was Metallica's bassist. He played on successful albums, toured worldwide, lived the dream. But inside the band, he often felt like an outsider. In interviews over the years, he's spoken about feeling undervalued, his musical ideas dismissed, a hierarchy that made him feel more employee than equal partner. There were specific incidents, resistance to his side project Echo Brain, musical ideas overruled, voice not carrying weight. Year after year, resentment built. In 2001, Jason left Metallica. Official statements were cordial, but beneath the surface was real bitterness. He'd given 15 years to a band that never fully accepted him as an equal. The years after his departure were difficult for Jason. He continued making music with various projects, but nothing achieved the success or recognition of Metallica. For a while, it seemed like his identity would always be Metallica's former bassist, defined by what he left rather than what he was doing now. During this time, Jason discovered a new creative outlet, visual art. He'd always been interested in painting and sculpture, but as a side interest. After leaving Metallica, with more time and mental space, he began taking it seriously. He studied techniques, experimented with different mediums, and found that visual art allowed him to express things that music never had. Initially, his art was private, a way to process his feelings about his years in Metallica, about fame, about identity. But gradually, he began showing his work. Small galleries at first, then larger exhibitions. Critics started taking notice. Jason Newsted, the artist, was creating work that stood on its own merit, completely separate from his musical legacy. His paintings often explored themes of sound made visual, abstract representations of music, color schemes inspired by metal album aesthetics, textured canvases that seemed to vibrate with energy. He also created pieces about isolation, about being part of something while feeling outside of it, about the weight of living in someone else's shadow. Over 20 years, Jason built a genuine reputation in the art world. He wasn't taken seriously because he'd been in Metallica. He was taken seriously because his work was good. That distinction mattered deeply to him. This was his achievement, built from nothing, proving he had value beyond his musical past. In 2022, Jason began work on what would become his masterpiece. It was a massive canvas, 10 feet tall, 15 feet wide, that took him 8 months to complete. He called it Master of Puppets, a direct reference to Metallica's album that had defined so much of his early experience with the band.
The painting was complex and layered. At first glance, it appeared to be abstract chaos, violent slashes of black and red, geometric shapes colliding, texture built up so thickly that parts of the canvas were almost sculptural. But as you looked longer, patterns emerged, musical notation hidden in the composition, puppet strings woven into the texture, and in the center, if you knew what to look for, the suggestion of a figure, trapped or dancing, it was impossible to tell. Art critics saw it as Jason's meditation on control, autonomy, and artistic identity. Some interpreted it as his statement about his time in Metallica. Was he the puppet or the master? Others saw it as something more universal about the relationship between an artist and their work, between individual and institution. When Jason announced the painting would be auctioned at Sotheby's in 2023, the art world took notice. The auction house valued it at $15 to $20 million, an extraordinary estimate for a living artist who'd come to painting relatively late in his career. The auction took place in October 2023 at Sotheby's prestigious New York location. The room was filled with serious collectors, art dealers, and curious onlookers who'd heard about the former Metallica bassist turned painter. When the auctioneer introduced Master of Puppets, there was an audible buzz of interest in the room. Bidding started at $10 million, already an extraordinary price, but it quickly became clear this would be no ordinary sale. Collectors from around the world bid aggressively, some in the room, others via phone from locations across the globe. The price climbed steadily, $20 million, $30 million, $40 million. Each new bid brought gasps from the audience. This wasn't just an art sale anymore, it was witnessing history. When the bidding finally slowed at $48 million, there was a tense pause. Then one final bid, $50 million. The hammer fell. The room erupted in applause. Jason, watching via video link from his studio, was stunned. $50 million, more money than he'd made in his entire 15 years with Metallica. Money that was entirely his, earned through his own work, with no connection to his musical past except in inspiration. For a few days, Jason sat with this achievement. He'd proven something profound, that he had value beyond being the guy who replaced Cliff Burton. He'd created something worth $50 million using nothing but his own talent and dedication. But as the initial excitement faded, Jason found himself thinking about Metallica, about James and Lars and Kirk, about the years of resentment he'd carried, about the anger that had defined so much of his life since 2001. He thought about the All We Are Saying Foundation, the charity that Metallica had founded years earlier to promote music education and support peace initiatives. He'd always respected that work, even when he was angry at the band themselves. And he made a decision that surprised even himself. He would donate the entire $50 million to that foundation, in Metallica's name. Despite everything that had happened, despite the hurt and resentment, he would honor them with the biggest achievement of his post-Metallica life. It wasn't an easy decision. Friends questioned it. His financial advisors were shocked. That money could have secured his future, funded his art for decades, established his own charitable legacy. But Jason felt strongly that this was what needed to happen. He called James Hetfield. It was the first time they'd spoken in 15 years. The conversation was awkward at first. Old wounds don't heal just because time has passed. But Jason explained what he'd decided. He'd sold a painting for $50 million. He was giving all of it to Metallica's charity. All of it. James was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, why? Jason's answer came from somewhere deep. Because you made me who I am. I spent 23 years being angry about how I was treated in Metallica. And maybe I had reasons to be angry, but I also had reasons to be grateful. You gave me a platform. You made me a better musician. You pushed me even when it hurt. Without Metallica, I don't become the artist who can sell a painting for $50 million. So this money, it came from me, but it wouldn't exist without you. And I was angry for too long." James didn't know how to respond. He'd spent years with his own regrets about how the band had treated Jason. He'd told himself Jason had chosen to leave, that it wasn't Metallica's fault. But hearing Jason's voice now, hearing the complicated mixture of pain and gratitude, James had to face his own role in that history.
"Jason," James said finally, "we didn't treat you right. I didn't treat you right. We made you feel like you weren't part of the family. I'm sorry." It was the first time anyone in Metallica had said those words to Jason. The first real acknowledgement that he'd been right to feel hurt. That phone call lasted 3 hours. They talked about the old days, about specific moments of conflict, about misunderstandings and pride, and the ways that success can poison relationships. They didn't fix everything. 23 years of bitterness doesn't disappear in one conversation, but they started something. Over the following months, Jason and James continued talking. Lars reached out. Kirk sent messages. The conversations were difficult, filled with uncomfortable truths and painful acknowledgments, but they kept happening. The $50 million donation was announced publicly in November 2023. The All We Are Saying Foundation released a statement expressing shock and gratitude, noting that this single donation represented more than the foundation had raised in the previous 5 years combined. Media covered the story extensively, not just music media, but mainstream news outlets fascinated by this act of generosity from someone who had every reason to remain bitter. Financial analysts called it one of the largest individual charitable donations of the year. Art World commentators praised Jason for using his success to make meaningful impact. The Metallica fan base had mixed reactions. Some longtime fans who remembered the bitter 2001 departure saw it as vindication that Jason had been the bigger person all along. Others wondered if this was Jason's way of proving something, that he could succeed without Metallica and then be generous with that success. Still others simply appreciated the beauty of the gesture without needing to analyze its motivations. Jason did one interview about the donation. He was asked why he'd given away such an enormous sum to a band he'd left on bad terms. His answer was thoughtful. Forgiveness isn't about saying that what happened didn't hurt. It's about deciding that the hurt doesn't get to define you forever. Metallica made me feel small sometimes, but they also made me part of something bigger than myself. Both things are true, and I needed to honor the whole truth, not just the parts that justified my anger. The gesture opened a door that had been closed for over 2 decades. By early 2024, Jason and Metallica were in regular communication. They talked about music, about art, about their lives. The old wounds were still there, but they were healing. In June 2024, Metallica was scheduled to play a massive festival in Europe. 80,000 people expected to attend. A month before the show, Lars called Jason with a question. "Would you want to join us on stage, just for one song? We'd love to have you back, even if it's just for a few minutes." Jason hesitated. Going back on stage with Metallica after 23 years felt enormous. What if it felt wrong? What if the old tensions resurfaced? What if it was a mistake? But Jason also recognized what the invitation represented: real forgiveness, real reconciliation, not just words, but action. "Yes," he said, "I'll do it." The festival show was on a warm summer evening. Metallica played their set to a massive, enthusiastic crowd. Near the end of the show, James stepped to the microphone and said, "We have a special guest tonight, someone who was part of this band for 15 years, someone we treated like family, until we didn't. We're trying to fix that. Please welcome Jason Newsted. Jason walked on stage to thunderous applause. He picked up a bass guitar, not the bass he'd played with Metallica decades ago, but a new one, representing this new chapter. The band launched into For Whom the Bell Tolls, a song Jason had played thousands of times with them. For those few minutes, it was like the years apart had never happened. The four of them locked in musically, the crowd singing along, the pure joy of making music together overriding everything else. When the song ended, James and Jason embraced on stage while 80,000 people cheered. It wasn't a full reunion. Jason wasn't rejoining Metallica permanently, but it was a moment of healing, of forgiveness made visible, of broken relationships being carefully repaired. After the show, backstage, the conversation between Jason and the band was different than it had been in decades. There was laughter, genuine affection, the ease of people who'd shared something profound and were learning to appreciate that bond again, despite the pain it had also caused. This fictional story of Jason Newsted's $50 million gesture and subsequent reconciliation with Metallica explores themes that are universal. How do we forgive people who've hurt us? How do we acknowledge that the people who made us feel small also helped us grow? How do we move beyond bitterness when bitterness feels justified? Jason's imagined choice to donate his success to the people he'd resented represents something profound, the recognition that grudges hurt the person holding them more than anyone else. That forgiveness isn't about saying what you did was okay. It's about saying, I'm not going to let what you did control me anymore. In this imagined scenario, James Hetfield's willingness to apologize, truly apologize, not with excuses or justifications, represents equally important growth. Sometimes the hardest words to say are, I was wrong, I hurt you, I'm sorry. But those words can open doors that seemed permanently closed. The $50 million in this story is symbolic. It represents Jason choosing to honor the complicated truth of his history, rather than just the parts that justified his anger. It represents the transformation from I'll show them I don't need them to they helped make me who I am, and I can acknowledge that without diminishing my own pain. Would Jason Newsted actually make this choice? We don't know. This is a fictional story. But it asks an important question. What would it take for you to forgive someone who hurt you deeply? And what would it take for you to apologize to someone you've hurt? Sometimes the answer to both questions is the same. The courage to acknowledge the whole truth, not just the version of the story that makes you feel justified. This is a story about art, about money, about fame, about grudges, and about healing. But most of all, it's a story about the possibility of forgiveness, even when you think it's too late, even when the wounds run deep, even when you've convinced yourself that some bridges are burned beyond repair. Because sometimes, if both sides are willing, those bridges can be rebuilt, not exactly as they were, but as something new, something honest, something that acknowledges both the pain and the gratitude, the hurt and the growth, the resentment and the love. Final reminder, this story is fictional. Jason Newsted did not sell a painting for $50 million. He did not donate money to Metallica's charity. This is an imagined scenario created to explore themes of forgiveness, reconciliation, and the complexity of human relationships.